Have you ever caught yourself questioning whether hardship and struggle might actually be essential ingredients in shaping who you become? In a world that often glorifies comfort and convenience, it can feel unsettling to wonder if constant ease might be leading us away from true growth. Yet, these are the kinds of questions that philosophers have debated for centuries, and arguably few thinkers have probed them more provocatively than Friedrich Nietzsche. Perhaps you've heard his famous proclamation, "God is dead," or the phrase, "What does not kill me makes me stronger," and wondered what sort of worldview could lie behind such blunt and unflinching statements. The truth is that Nietzsche's works go far deeper than quick aphorisms or bleak pronouncements. He offered a profound, deeply challenging perspective on life, one that revolved around personal reinvention, the necessity of struggle, and the ultimate value of overcoming adversity in the pursuit of a genuinely fulfilling existence. By exploring these themes and understanding how Nietzsche believed the individual could harness their inner power, we can glean insights that remain strikingly relevant to our own modern search for purpose and resilience.
If you've ever wanted a roadmap for transforming suffering into strength, or asked yourself how to navigate life's hardest knocks without becoming embittered or resigned, exploring Nietzsche's perspective can be illuminating. Rather than offering a series of tidy instructions or easily digestible platitudes, Nietzsche challenges us to look at the uncomfortable truths of the human condition head-on. He invites us to confront the inevitable chaos, insecurity, and pain that accompany a deeply engaged life, all while urging us not to shrink from these experiences, but to embrace them as catalysts for growth. Over the course of this discussion, we'll delve into the essence of his philosophy, touching on such core ideas as the will to power, the Übermensch or Overman, eternal recurrence, and the importance of self-overcoming. We'll then connect Nietzsche's ideas to our modern world using real-world scenarios in leadership, personal development, and mental resilience to show how his sometimes counterintuitive lessons can help us shape our own journeys. Above all, this exploration is meant to encourage a more introspective and courageous mindset, one that questions superficial conceptions of success and instead seeks a more meaningful transformation of the self. Nietzsche's overarching focus on the individual's power to define themselves stands out against his backdrop of 19th century German philosophy, which was dominated by academic systems that often sought grand universal truths. Where many philosophical projects tried to tie everything into neat structures, Nietzsche's writings were a clarion call to the uniqueness of every human being's experience. He saw a world in which established values, social norms, and moral codes were often products of tradition or institutions that promoted mediocrity and comfort over genuine depth. From his perspective, people clung to these rules for security rather than embracing the inherent chaos and creativity of life. One of his bold claims was that many of these inherited or socially conditioned beliefs had begun to lose their credibility, a phenomenon he captured in the stark phrase, "God is dead." Far from merely a statement about religion, it was a metaphor pointing to the erosion of the unquestioned value systems that once provided meaning. Without these stable frameworks, the individual is left adrift, forced to find or create new meanings for life, in a world that can appear indifferent or even hostile. This is where personal growth becomes not just a nice option, but an existential requirement. Confronted with this vacuum of meaning, each of us must learn to forge our own values and ideals, an endeavor Nietzsche believed would inevitably be marked by trials, setbacks, and inner battles, but would also prove liberating if pursued honestly.
Central to Nietzsche's view of individual transformation is the concept of the will to power. In broad terms, The will to power can be understood as the fundamental drive in all living beings to assert themselves, grow, dominate, or express force. For Nietzsche, it wasn't just a human phenomenon. He interpreted all life forms as seeking some shape of growth or expansion. Plants reach for the sun, animals compete for territory, and humans strive for influence or creativity. This is not to suggest that Nietzsche was advocating a ruthless, dog-eat-dog worldview devoid of compassion. Instead, he was challenging the idea that life is primarily about survival or static contentment. He believed there is a more profound, more dynamic urge within each of us that seeks to expand, to shape the world in accordance with our deepest instincts and to overcome whatever limitations constrain us. When we talk about personal growth and overcoming adversity, we are, in Nietzschean terms, tapping into this will to power. Every time you decide to confront a fear or develop a skill, you're exercising this inner momentum that refuses to remain stagnant. According to Nietzsche, it's precisely through hardship and challenge that the will to power becomes most potent, transforming obstacles from sources of despair into stepping stones for self-elevation.
Nietzsche underscored the idea that in order to grow and thrive, we must be willing to face discomfort and even suffering. Unlike certain philosophical or religious traditions that view suffering solely as an evil to be eliminated, or as an unfortunate byproduct of flawed human existence, Nietzsche saw suffering as an almost indispensable spur. It serves as a test, a crucible that can forge strength, authenticity, and depth of character, provided we have the right attitude toward it. In his eyes, people who constantly avoid suffering by seeking refuge in complacency or superficial happiness miss out on life's most vital opportunities for transformation. This is not to glamorize pain or treat trauma lightly. Rather, it's an insistence that adversity can break us out of our habitual ways of living and force us to reevaluate who we are and who we want to become. Much of his philosophy challenges us to ask, if comfort is your highest goal, are you not forfeiting the possibility of a more profound, courageous, and exuberant kind of existence? One of Nietzsche's most famous and challenging ideas is that of eternal recurrence, or eternal return. He asks us to imagine that our life, in all its details, both triumphant and tragic, will repeat forever in an infinite cycle. Every joy, every failure, every moment of heartbreak, and every flicker of bliss will return, again and again, down to the tiniest detail. If we recoil in horror at the thought, it suggests that our life or our attitude toward it might be lacking in authenticity or courage. If, on the other hand, we can embrace the idea, even celebrate it, this acceptance indicates that we have learned to affirm our existence wholeheartedly, including its darkest and most painful parts. The eternal recurrence is a philosophical litmus test for whether we truly say yes to life. In practical terms, think of it as a personal inventory. If you had to relive your choices and experiences perpetually, which habits, relationships, or mindsets would you want to change now? Which would you cherish and preserve? These reflections mirror Nietzsche's broader theme. Only by facing the totality of our existence, its adversity included, can we evolve into more expansive versions of ourselves.
Another core concept is the Übermensch, often translated as the Overman or Superman. It is one of Nietzsche's most misunderstood ideas, frequently reduced to a caricature of brute force or used to justify toxic elitism. In truth, the Overman embodies an individual who has transcended the ordinary constraints of cultural norms and moralities that no longer serve them, to forge their own path and values. This person is someone who doesn't need external validation or rigid moral dogmas to navigate the world. Instead, they live by self-created principles, guided by a deep sense of personal responsibility and an unshakable commitment to self-overcoming. The Overman is, in a way, the ultimate expression of the will to power, creative, life-affirming, and resilient. Rather than conform, this figure redefines what it means to be human by consistently striving to exceed not just society's expectations, but also their own perceived limitations. The Overman is meant to be inspirational rather than tyrannical. It's a symbol of what a human might become if they used adversity as fuel and never settled for complacency or herd-like thinking. But how do these abstract ideas about the will to power, self-overcoming, and the Overman translate into our modern context? Consider a person in a leadership position, whether in business, politics, or even a community organization. A purely comfort-focused approach might lead them to avoid risks, stick to safe decisions, and evade conflict, all in the name of stability. In Nietzsche's framework, that leader remains stunted. They fail to harness their own creative force, the will to power that pushes them to innovate because they're more concerned with preserving the status quo than evolving beyond it. On the other hand, a leader who embodies the spirit of self-overcoming might see every challenge, every market downturn, every organizational conflict, every time they fail to meet a goal, as an impetus to rethink methods, grow in resilience, and cultivate new strengths. This doesn't mean courting chaos for its own sake, but rather not shying away from it when it appears. It means being willing to say, this situation is difficult, but it's through grappling with difficulty that we progress. Viewed in this light, adversity becomes a signpost indicating areas of potential growth rather than a dead end of despair.
On a more personal scale, consider the day-to-day stress that many of us face, juggling jobs, maintaining relationships, or grappling with questions about our identity or direction in life. In a conventional mindset, stress is something to minimize, dodge, or numb through distractions. Nietzsche's perspective would challenge this reflex. He might say that while chronic, debilitating stress is unhealthy and should be addressed, the presence of challenges and uncertainties can also push us to question assumptions about our limits. Perhaps we discover that we're stronger than we thought, or that we have a hidden capacity for creative problem solving when we're forced to adapt. Rather than automatically seeking to escape the tension, Nietzsche invites us to see tension as a raw ingredient for transformation. Engaging with the stress consciously can reveal new facets of ourselves and expand our sense of what is possible. Historical examples can further bring these ideas to life. Nietzsche himself was no stranger to adversity. He suffered from debilitating health problems throughout his life, often enduring migraines, vision issues, and a variety of other ailments. His professional career was marked by early retirement from academia, partly because of those health issues, and partly because his ideas were far too unconventional for the scholarly mainstream of his day. Many of his books sold few copies during his lifetime, leaving him isolated, misunderstood, and financially strained. Yet from these struggles, he produced works of staggering depth and originality. He didn't simply passively endure his hardships. He used them as intellectual and emotional fodder for exploring what it means to remain steadfast and creative in a world that seems, at times, indifferent or even punishing. Rather than be broken by life's difficulties, he was bent on transforming them into philosophical gold. His personal story underscores his maxim that one must not merely accept, but love one's fate. Amor fati, finding in it the seeds of growth.
Outside Nietzsche's own life, take the story of someone like Ludwig van Beethoven, who continued to compose enduring masterpieces even after losing his hearing, or Helen Keller, who achieved remarkable intellectual and social feats despite the barriers of being both deaf and blind. Though these figures are often viewed through a lens of triumph against adversity, it's illuminating to consider how they might fit into a Nietzschean narrative of self-overcoming. They didn't simply conquer external obstacles. They redefined what was possible for themselves. They didn't wait for a perfect environment or lament the unfairness of their plight. Instead, they harnessed every ounce of will to transform their circumstances into a testament to the resilience and creative power that humans can manifest. While Nietzsche didn't specifically reference either Beethoven or Keller, their journeys echo the spirit of turning adversity into an occasion for rising above one's perceived limitations, which is central to his outlook. In the modern era, countless individuals embody these principles when they refuse to be defined by their setbacks. Think of an athlete recovering from a career-threatening injury who returns to competition with renewed vigor, or an entrepreneur who suffers a string of failed ventures before hitting on a breakthrough. The common thread is a relentless commitment to growth, fueled not by uncritical positivity or naive optimism, but by a clear-eyed acceptance that struggle is part of life. Indeed, many people who truly change the world, whether in science, art, business, or social activism, are those who are not afraid to butt heads with prevailing norms or to confront failure head-on. Their story is seldom one of easy progression. It's usually a tale of repeated confrontations with adversity, each time emerging with new insights or strengths. This pattern mirrors Nietzsche's belief that greatness, in any field, almost requires a certain friction with the environment, some form of adversity that spurs one to break old patterns and transcend old boundaries.
Now, in taking these ideas seriously, we might feel a range of emotions. Perhaps we're intrigued, but also daunted. Does embracing adversity mean constantly seeking out pain? Does it mean disregarding moral standards and social harmony? Nietzsche's response would be more nuanced than a simple yes or no. He would emphasize that adversity is not something to fetishize, but to respond to with transformative energy. He also believed in re-evaluating all values, not ignoring them. The call is to examine how our inherited moral codes and societal expectations can limit our growth by promoting fear or complacency. We are to sift through them, keep what serves our higher aims, and discard what holds us back. This is a deeply individual process, one that requires self-honesty, courage, and, ironically enough, a willingness to fail. It is not a linear path. It can involve several painful cycles of self-discovery before real transformation takes root. The deepest form of adversity that Nietzsche would have us confront, though, might be our own self-doubt, our own fear of forging a unique path. It's one thing to face external hardship, losing a job, suffering an injury, or dealing with unforeseen life events. It's another to face the internal turmoil of questioning our most fundamental beliefs and identities. Nietzsche recognized that truly embracing growth requires stepping outside conventional certainties. It's about having the bravery to say, I am willing to become someone new, even if that means leaving behind relationships or self-images that no longer serve us. The tension between who we are and who we might become can be frightening, especially if we worry about rejection or misunderstanding from those around us. Yet this tension, as Nietzsche saw it, is the seat of authentic vitality. We are not meant to remain static. The self, for him, is not a finished product, but a continual evolution, spurred on by the will to power and sharpened by adversity. This notion is echoed in modern psychology's emphasis on post-traumatic growth. The idea that experiencing difficulty can lead to greater personal development, clarity of purpose, and empathy if we engage with it thoughtfully.
Perhaps now is a good time to pause and consider your own life. Think about a moment that truly tested you, one that forced you out of your comfort zone and left you feeling exposed or uncertain. How did you respond? Did you meet that moment with resentment or resignation, or did you attempt to harness it as an impetus for growth? Nietzsche would suggest reflecting on whether there was a kernel of strength or insight that came from that hardship. Even if at the time you felt only frustration or despair, look back and see if it planted the seeds of a new skill, a stronger sense of self, or a new appreciation for what matters. If so, perhaps that moment was your unconscious encounter with a Nietzschean principle. If not, might there be a way to reevaluate it now, gleaning lessons in hindsight and transforming regret into resolve for the future?
Another question to contemplate is, what areas of your life feel stagnant, where you sense an unfulfilled potential that you've been too cautious to explore? Maybe it's a career you've outgrown, a project you've always wanted to start, or a mindset you suspect is limiting you. Nietzsche would likely urge you to see how adversity might propel you toward change. Perhaps it's the uncomfortable recognition that you are bored or unchallenged, or that you're tolerating a situation that drains your vitality. Leaning into that discomfort, rather than ignoring it, could be the spark that drives you to take a risk, confront the uncertainty, and in so doing, discover reserves of creativity or determination you didn't know you had. The notion of self-overcoming entails shedding old skins, old beliefs that no longer serve. It's rarely painless, but if you consider that the alternative might be a resigned acceptance of mediocrity, the choice becomes clearer. Nietzsche forces us to ask, do we really want to live less vibrantly, less authentically, just to avoid discomfort? Facing fear or misconception is an integral part of this process. Many of us carry around inaccurate ideas about Nietzsche, perhaps gleaned from second-hand sources or popular misinterpretations. Some see him as a champion of ruthless power, or interpret him in the light of political ideologies that twisted his writings for their own ends. Others dismiss him as a mere cynic, an embittered figure who was anti-morality. But reading him more carefully reveals a philosopher who was deeply concerned with the cultivation of individual nobility, in the sense of a noble spirit rather than aristocratic birth, and the expression of life's creative energies. The notion of the will to power is so often misunderstood as advocating domination over others. More accurately, it's an assertion of the life force within each of us, driving us to exceed our previous selves. If you feel any apprehension or fear toward Nietzsche's philosophy, consider where it might stem from. Is it due to the radical challenge he poses to comfort and convention? Is it because some of his language about greatness and strength has been co-opted by those with harmful agendas? A moment of honest, reflective confrontation with these fears or misconceptions can help us see Nietzsche's teachings in a more nuanced and potentially transformative light.
Revisiting Nietzsche's life and works with this perspective can be a form of confrontation itself. We realize that he was no stranger to vulnerability, writing extensively about solitude, heartbreak, and existential anguish. He endured personal estrangements, chronic illness, and severe professional disappointments. It was precisely through these trials that he developed a laser-like focus on how adversity can refine a person, stripping away illusions and forging a sharper sense of self. His challenge to the rest of us is to recognize that every individual has some capacity to engage with life in this deeply personal, creative, and courageous way, even if it means standing at odds with the mainstream. We might not all become Nietzschean philosophers, but we can internalize the spirit of his teachings, seeing adversity not as a curse, but as a potential impetus for growth, authenticity, and the forging of new values. With that in mind, consider how you might apply these insights in simple, everyday scenarios. It might be as small as deciding to have a difficult conversation you've been avoiding, knowing that the short-term discomfort is worth the long-term clarity and potential improvement in the relationship. It might be trying a new discipline, learning a language, practicing an art, or entering a professional field that both excites and terrifies you. Perhaps it's a more inward shift, a resolve to stop seeking external approval and begin cultivating your own moral or aesthetic values. The key is not to reject comfort entirely, but to remain vigilant about how easily comfort can lull us into stagnation. Think of adversity or challenge as life's way of offering you a mirror that shows where your will to power can manifest, where you can break old patterns, and where you can grow into something freer and more formidable.
Even in the realm of mental health, Nietzsche's teachings can have intriguing applications. While he was no therapist, his style is too blunt for that. His insistence on transforming suffering into strength aligns with approaches like cognitive behavioral therapy or mindfulness practices that encourage us not to run from negative emotions, but to acknowledge them, challenge our thoughts, and find more constructive ways to move forward. One might interpret Nietzsche's aphorisms about hardship as a proto-version of post-traumatic growth theories, which suggest that, rather than being crushed by trauma, individuals can sometimes experience profound personal development as a result. Of course, it's crucial to note that not everyone's adversity leads to growth automatically. It takes deliberate effort, and it's often accompanied by pain, confusion, and setbacks along the way. Nietzsche doesn't offer a guarantee of transformation. He offers a challenge, a provocation that if you want to craft a life worth living, one that you could potentially relive in that eternal recurrence, then you must be willing to face the darkness as well as the light.
Many people balk at the idea that adversity can be anything other than negative, especially in cultures that sell quick fixes and emphasize instant gratification. In such an environment, Nietzsche's message can feel harsh or even heretical. But consider how fleeting the satisfaction of purely external accomplishments can be if they aren't underpinned by genuine inner transformation. A person might accumulate wealth, status, and public recognition, yet feel hollow if they haven't confronted their deeper fears, or if they shy away from the challenges that could lead to true self-knowledge. Nietzsche would say that without the crucible of adversity, we remain only half-formed versions of ourselves, cut off from the deeper power that arises when we meet life's tests head-on. This perspective can be unsettling precisely because it reveals that growth demands responsibility, an active engagement with life's complexities rather than a passive acceptance of them.
As you think about your own path, reflect on the question, in a world that has, in many ways, never been more comfortable or convenient. Is it possible that we've lost touch with a vital aspect of what it means to be fully alive? Could it be that our modern quest to eliminate all forms of difficulty through technology, social systems, or personal avoidance risks weakening our capacity for resilience and genuine self-authorship? This is not to say we should romanticize poverty or illness or strife. It is to say, however, that encountering obstacles, be they intellectual, emotional, or physical, can awaken strengths that remain dormant in perpetual comfort. Nietzsche invites us to see adversity not as a mere obstacle to circumvent, but as a co-creator in the drama of life's unfolding, one that can shape our character in ways we might never have anticipated.
At this point, you might be wondering how to balance Nietzsche's call for self-overcoming with practical concerns about mental health, relationships, and societal responsibilities. After all, embracing adversity does not mean recklessly plunging into chaotic or self-destructive behaviors. Nietzsche would argue for the cultivation of self-awareness to distinguish between challenges that enrich us and destructive impulses that drain or derail us. His emphasis on reevaluating all values can also act as a safeguard. We assess not only social norms, but also our own impulses and drives, discerning which ones lead to expansion, creativity, and deeper engagement with life, and which ones foster only negativity or harm. In a sense, self-overcoming means taking ownership of your entire being, your instincts, your aspirations, your strengths, and your weaknesses, and using them consciously to navigate the world rather than letting them run amok. Now, consider what you can do in the near future to put these ideas into practice. It might be writing down a personal goal that both excites and terrifies you. Perhaps it's deciding to read one of Nietzsche's key works. Thus spoke Zarathustra, Beyond Good and Evil, or The Genealogy of Morals. With an open mind and a critical eye, you might explore journaling prompts about how you've handled adversity in the past, identifying patterns in your response, and considering which ones you'd like to maintain or change. Alternatively, you might take a tangible step toward confronting something you've been avoiding, a difficult conversation, a necessary change in your routine, or a new endeavor that pushes you to rethink your limits. In each of these actions, try to remain aware of the mental and emotional resistance that arises. Rather than ignoring that resistance, inquire into it. Is it rooted in fear, in habit, or in the worry that you're not enough? Nietzsche would remind us that such discomfort can be precisely the sign that we're standing at the threshold of potential growth. Cross that threshold, engage with the adversity, and see what emerges on the other side. If you catch yourself hesitating, ask, what if this moment were to repeat eternally? Would you continuously shy away from the challenge, or would you lean into it and claim the opportunity it holds? Think of this as a small-scale application of the eternal recurrence. When you consider life in that expanded sense, certain hesitations or excuses lose their weight. It becomes clear that time is finite, and each decision contributes to the shaping of who we are. Even if you don't believe in a literal eternal return, the metaphor can galvanize you to consider what legacy you're leaving for yourself.
A further misconception to confront might be the idea that Nietzsche's philosophy is purely individualistic, ignoring community or collective well-being. While Nietzsche undeniably prioritized individual growth and the overcoming of herd mentalities, that doesn't mean he endorsed a callous disregard for others. In fact, one could argue that the more an individual refines their own strength, creativity, and autonomy, the more they can contribute to the world in genuinely original and beneficial ways. Rather than mindlessly following groupthink, the self-overcoming individual can offer new perspectives, solutions, and forms of leadership that raise the collective to new heights. Certainly, Nietzsche never wrote a systematic treatise on community development, but the spirit of his philosophy suggests that the best contributions to society often arise from those who refuse to conform blindly, who challenge themselves relentlessly, and who bring forth ideas that initially may seem unsettling, but ultimately expand what is possible for everyone. This underscores a deeply empowering message that genuine change, whether on a personal scale or a societal scale, often begins with one individual deciding not to remain complacent. When faced with adversity, whether it's a systemic injustice or a private struggle, such an individual harnesses their inner will to power, to push for transformation. They do not wait for permission or perfect conditions. They act, risking failure or even ridicule. Over time, these acts of courage can accumulate into broader cultural shifts. Many of history's most revered figures, from revolutionary leaders to visionary artists, were essentially practicing what Nietzsche preached. They saw the failings or limitations of their time and refused to submit quietly. They used adversity as their teacher and sometimes as their motivator, forging a path that future generations would admire and follow. What might begin as an intensely personal journey of self-overcoming can radiate outward, altering the social fabric. From this vantage point, we might see that adversity is not only personal, but can also come from broader societal forces. Economic instability, conflicts, discrimination, or widespread crises can each test our resolve and our sense of what values we hold dear. Nietzsche's philosophy doesn't offer a simplistic blueprint for fixing the world, but it does offer a robust method for engaging with it. Namely, he teaches us to first become fully alive, fully responsible for our own capacity for change. Then, if we choose to engage with social problems, we do so from a place of strength and authentic conviction, rather than from blind conformity or naive idealism.
As you reflect on these intersections, notice if you feel a spark of motivation, a heightened sense of curiosity, or even a tug of apprehension. All these reactions can be valuable. Nietzsche believed that genuine thinking involves tension, contradiction, and friction. It's the kind of philosophy that can stir up our emotions because it touches on existential concerns, meaning, purpose, suffering, and the possibility of transcendence. Embrace that internal stirring rather than dismissing it. Let it serve as evidence that you are confronting deep questions, the very kinds of questions that can reshape how you live. Throughout this journey, maintain an attitude of self-compassion balanced by self-honesty. Nietzsche's tone can be severe at times, and it's easy to slip into self-criticism if we take his words as a harsh moral imperative. Instead, consider his writings as an invitation to explore what your best life could look like, how you might transform adversity into a teacher and ally rather than an enemy. At the same time, remain honest about where you are in your own development. Part of self-overcoming means recognizing limits, working diligently to expand them, but also understanding that transformation is a process, not a single leap to perfection. Accepting your imperfections while striving to refine yourself is a hallmark of genuine growth. Now step back for a moment and observe the terrain we have covered. We've explored how Nietzsche's insights on adversity, the will to power, eternal recurrence, and the concept of the Overman can be understood as catalysts for personal growth. We've seen how historical figures, as well as individuals in our current era, can exemplify the spirit of self-overcoming by embracing challenges rather than fleeing from them. We've confronted some common misconceptions and considered that adversity might not just be a nuisance or a curse, but rather a necessary ingredient in forging a more resilient and creative self. We've also looked at how these ideas might apply in everyday life, whether in leadership, personal relationships, or self-discovery. Before this exploration ends, it's worth posing a final question to yourself. How do you intend to engage with adversity going forward, now that you've seen how pivotal it can be to growth? Will you view struggles as pointless setbacks to be minimized, or can you welcome them as important signals that you are, in fact, living at the edge of your current capacities, ready to surpass what you once thought possible? If the latter appeals to you, consider one step, however small, you can take this very day that aligns with that outlook. Maybe it's deciding to reframe a problem you're facing as an opportunity to learn. Maybe it's brainstorming new approaches to an ongoing challenge, or reaching out for support in a way that fosters resilience instead of resignation. This isn't a neat conclusion where everything is resolved. In true Nietzschean fashion, the story remains open-ended, a perpetual becoming. The hope is that this conversation sparks your own determination to wrestle with life's complexities more fiercely and passionately, understanding that meaning is not handed to us on a silver platter, but created through our struggles, our triumphs, and even our failures. A vibrant life, one worth saying yes to, is seldom one free from suffering. It's one that acknowledges the pain, uses it for growth, and emerges each time more audacious and self-defined.
If you have found value in these reflections, consider how you might share or extend them. One way is to discuss these ideas with friends, colleagues, or in an online community, inviting others to reflect on the role adversity has played in their personal evolution. Another is to leave a comment or a thought-provoking question that further deepens the conversation, inviting perspectives that challenge or refine your own. You might also decide to keep this philosophical thread alive by exploring Nietzsche's works directly, or by investigating parallel thinkers who grapple with the interplay between suffering and meaning. Figures like Viktor Frankl, Carl Jung, or contemporary authors who build on these existential themes. Sharing these insights not only helps solidify your own understanding, but can also encourage others to adopt a more courageous and reflective stance toward their own challenges.
By spreading the word, you connect with fellow seekers who may be at various stages in their paths of overcoming hardship. The more people engage earnestly with these ideas, the more likely we are to foster communities that prize authenticity, resilience, and creativity. Imagine a world in which adversity is not seen merely as an unfortunate interruption to the pursuit of comfort, but as a shared human experience that can galvanize us to take bigger, bolder strides towards self-discovery and collective betterment. While that might sound idealistic, it's the kind of idealism rooted in very tangible transformations, individuals making choices that reflect a deeper commitment to growing through what they endure.
At the end of this journey, each of us stands at a crossroads. One road leads to a life spent avoiding discomfort at all costs, clinging to convenient beliefs, and numbing ourselves to the deeper questions about who we can become. The other road, the Nietzschean path, dares us to find meaning in life's turbulent waters, to look at adversity as an ally, and to seek a form of personal empowerment that embraces both joy and sorrow, both triumph and trial. The decision is yours, and it unfolds in the countless small actions and inner choices you make each day. May this reflection embolden you to keep asking the hard questions, to keep testing your limits, and to never settle for a mere shadow of the life you're capable of living. If these words have resonated with you, join in the ongoing conversation, share your insights, and continue to explore how Nietzsche's teachings can enrich your own pursuit of personal growth and resilience. And if you choose to keep going down this path, remember that each challenge is not just a hurdle, it's an invitation to evolve into a more daring, more compassionate, and more profound version of yourself.
If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, share it with someone who needs to hear this, and don't forget to subscribe for more in-depth analyses of leadership and history's greatest lessons.